China Shock 1.0 destroyed 1 million American jobs. This one could obliterate entire economies. Germany is collapsing, Southeast Asia is drowning, and the economic tsunami about to hit is bigger than anything we've ever seen in 20 years. This isn't just about cheap electronics anymore. China now floods the market with electric vehicles, industrial machines, and high-tech products at prices no one can match. When this wave crashes, it won't just shatter factories. It will rewrite who controls the global economy for the next 50 years. Chinese exports are exploding, prices keep plummeting, and countries are desperately building tariff walls. But those walls, they won't hold. And the terrifying part? It's already happening. Everything changed when China became a member of the World Trade Organization in 2001 and opened the dam of cheap manufactured products. Inexpensive textiles, toys, furniture, and electronics flooded the world market at rates that the Western manufacturers could not compete with. The Chinese import competition cost the United States about 2.4 million jobs between 2001 and 2011. Cities built around manufacturing experienced factory closures and a downward spiral that still persists today. China required the industrial machines and precision tools which were the specialty of German companies. German car sales in China shot up when the new Chinese middle-income population became madly in love with Mercedes, BMW, and Volkswagen. In 2012, German exports to China reached almost 3% of GDP. Compare that to the United States, where exports to China never reached over 1%. China Shock 1.0 destroyed producers of basic goods and rewarded suppliers of sophisticated technology China couldn't replicate. The question is, what happens when China masters those technologies? Is the world ready for what's coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're finding this valuable, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. In 2015, China launched Made in China 2025, a decade-long strategic plan to make it an advanced manufacturing powerhouse. It was dismissed by most Western analysts as propaganda. They were disastrously mistaken. China had made a huge investment in research and industrial policy that was strategically coordinated and which democracies find hard to keep pace with. By 2024, China had met 86% of the 260 specific targets of the plan. The outcomes are self-explanatory. China has now taken over the manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries and solar panels. Chinese firms now make smartphones as advanced as iPhones. The nation is a leader in AI applications and robotics. Most humiliating for Europe, China is now producing world-class electric cars and competing directly in industrial machines once dominated by Germany. This is how quickly this occurred. In 2019, China was a net importer of cars, with it importing 1 million more than it exported. By 2023, China was the largest car exporter in the world as it exported 5 million vehicles more than it imported. German manufacturers who went to China after the pandemic discovered that Chinese competitors were selling industrial machines at 30% lower prices. That is not only efficient, it is a completely different economic model. Superior efficiency can't account for those numbers. Wait until you discover what's truly forcing these prices down. China is saturating the world markets with cheap products not due to power, but due to lack of power. China has been stuck in a balance sheet recession since the burst of its real estate bubble in year 2021. Household wealth was wiped out as property values collapsed. Consumer confidence collapsed. The domestic demand was shattered, and it is still in a state of suppression. Consumer inflation in China has remained at very low levels for years. These are red flags that the domestic market in China is not able to consume what its factories are producing. Whatever happened to all that production? Overseas, China is frantically attempting to ship its way out of a domestic recession. In 2024, China had a trade surplus of $997 billion. Chinese households use only 38% of GDP on consumption as opposed to 68% in the United States. That huge disconnect between Chinese production and Chinese consumption must have a destination. In early 2025, Chinese exports to Southeast Asia increased by 11.5% annually. Exports to ASEAN increased 20.8% in April alone. According to Goldman Sachs, the Chinese products imported by Japan were estimated to be about 15% cheaper than other imported products. And if watching economies buckle under those prices concerns you, the next country changes everything. Developing nations that had modeled their growth policies on export-oriented manufacturing are finding that China Shock 2.0 has severed their road to success. The development playbook has been simple over decades. Begin with low-end production, capacity building, ascend the value chain, and become part of advanced economies. South Korea and Taiwan did so with success. China Shock 2.0 closes that door. What can Vietnam or Indonesia do to compete with Chinese production when China has surplus capacity, global infrastructure, invincible supply chains, and is able to underprice everyone and still have acceptable quality? They can't. Anti-dumping fees and protective tariffs have been imposed by countries in Asia in an attempt to protect local manufacturers. India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines are in a frenzied attempt to build walls. Those walls are bandages on gunshot wounds. Chinese products bypass the barriers by transshipment, whereby goods are rerouted by third countries. Nomura estimates that Thailand will be the most affected, possibly falling into deflation this year, with the prices of cheap Chinese imports crushing local producers. The real weapon fueling China's edge reveals an economic model the world has never seen. One big question looms above it all. How much of the Chinese competitive advantage is due to real efficiency rather than government subsidiaries that distort markets? The answer is uncomfortable. According to a recent study by the International Monetary Fund, the Chinese industrial subsidies are estimated to be a staggering 4% of GDP every year. That is hundreds of billions of direct and indirect subsidies to Chinese manufacturers. These subsidies are of numerous forms. The Chinese firms are given free or highly subsidized land. State-controlled banks provide them with access to cheap credit. They are given direct cash payments and tax breaks, even if they never become profitable. In a normal market economy, unprofitable firms are forced out of business, which clears surplus capacity. In the Chinese system, unprofitable manufacturers continue to operate, continue to produce, and continue to export, all supported by the government. This forms a vicious circle. Deflation is caused by subsidized overproduction. That deflation compels businesses to export at low prices. Such exports overwhelm the world market at the expense of foreign rivals. Regulatory arbitrage is also cited by European manufacturers. Chinese firms tend to avoid safety, environmental, and quality standards that are required by Western firms. This isn't free trade. Most nations simply cannot retaliate effectively. This subsidized dominance is already reshaping the world economy, and what desperate governments are doing about it could either save manufacturing or burn everything down. The situation in Germany is disastrous because its entire economic system is based on exporting high-end manufactured products. And China has just turned into its greatest rival in precisely those areas. In Germany, manufacturing contributes 18% of the GDP as compared to only 10% in the United States. German exports constitute more than 42% of GDP compared to less than 11% of American exports. That implies that Germany is much more susceptible to export shocks. German industrial production has decreased by 4.5% in the last 6 months. Exports are nosediving. Layoffs and furloughs are piling up. Economist Dalia Marin of the Technical University of Munich refers to it as an existential shock to Germany. The initial China shock wiped out American manufacturing and helped create political turmoil that continues to transform politics 2 decades later. Germany is experiencing something that's even worse. Chinese rivals are now providing machines at a 30% discount. The car industry in Germany is in the same state of destruction. German imports are no longer essential to Chinese consumers. They have developed substitutes at home that are less expensive and more advanced. Germany's pain cascades throughout Europe via supply chain networks. If seeing an advanced economy face collapse is alarming, wait until you discover who else is being destroyed. Countries are scrambling frantically towards tariffs in the face of the China Shock 2.0 onslaught. The United States imposed blanket tariffs on Chinese products in 2025, which ultimately hit 145% on Chinese imports. Tariffs were imposed on Chinese electric vehicles by the European Union. Canada, India, and dozens of nations put up several trade barriers, but tariffs are a crude tool that has grave consequences. In the case of the first Trump administration, when the United States imposed tariffs, it was found that American imposters and consumers were the ones who were most affected, rather than Chinese exporters. The current tariff wave will cost American consumers over $200 billion in higher prices. That is money out of household budgets, decreased purchasing power, and slowed growth. Worse still, tariffs do not deal with the root cause. Chinese products are not eliminated, they are diverted. When the American tariffs prevent the entry of Chinese products, the same products are flooded into Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. The world trade tends to change, yet there is still Chinese overcapacity. China retaliated against American tariffs by imposing 84% tariffs on American products. That provoked further escalation. The financial markets responded with panic. VIX volatility index shot up to a level that was only experienced during the 2008 crisis and 2020 pandemic. Will tariffs preserve domestic manufacturing or just postpone collapse? Watching this scramble unfold is troubling. Yet, the forces rendering all of it pointless change everything about what comes next. This is the unpleasant fact that policymakers do not want to acknowledge. China Shock 2.0 may be inescapable using the existing instruments. The dynamics behind it are too strong. China has excess that it can export. Chinese firms have reached technological equality in key areas. Chinese manufacturers enjoy economies of scale, global supply chains, and huge government subsidies. The Chinese domestic demand is too weak to take up production. Those are not factors that are going to change anytime soon. The real estate crisis in China will take years to be solved. The consumption pattern of households changes slowly. There is no indication that government policy is shifting away from export-led growth. Other countries are not coordinated in the meantime. America imposes tariffs. Europe has other policies. Asian countries compete to win Chinese investment. There is no unified strategy. Other economists say that the only way out is to persuade China to increase domestic demand and decrease reliance on exports. China could absorb more production domestically if households consumed 60% of GDP instead of 30%. However, that would mean China would have to radically redesign its economic model, which would take decades. The 2024 economy policy documents of China do not indicate that pivot. That is to say, China Shock 2.0 will last years, maybe even decades. And the world economy? Well, we'll just adjust to a new reality in which the dominance of Chinese manufacturing determines which nations prosper and which do not. The global economy looked stable until it didn't. Whether it's Germany's industrial collapse, Asians drowning exporters, or tariff walls that won't hold, the cracks are spreading faster than anyone admits. If this breakdown opened your eyes, smash that like button, drop a comment on where this is really headed, and subscribe for more deep dives into the economic forces reshaping our world.